News Radio 700 WLW.
So there is evidence that the anti-woke economy is beginning to take foothold. Now, for the longest time, companies were reticent to take any side politically. Michael Jordan had the best quote of it all. He says, Republicans buy sneakers too. But companies began to weigh in on political issues 3 or 4 years ago, really in the middle of the Trump presidency. And I think a lot of them are now backing away from getting involved in any kind of local movement, any kind of national movement, BLM, anything that would in some way, shape, or form polarize what they're trying to do. And what they're trying to do is make money. They're trying to sell things. But there is evidence that the anti-woke economy is starting to make inroads, largely with Republicans, because by and large, Republicans don't want politics in things that they buy. They just want to buy something if they like it and make it work. And if it doesn't work, they'll go buy something else. Democrats, almost overwhelmingly, either want politics in what people are selling, or they at least want to know where that company is leaning one way or the other. But is there anything to this anti-woke economy? Standing by is an expert on branding and trust. We've had Scott Baradell on the show before. He is with a company called Idea Grow, which is a marketing company helping companies and organizations tell their story for the past 20 years. And Scott Baradell, how are you on this glorious day?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm well. Scott, I don't think it should be a surprise that after, maybe a lot of these companies going one way politically, they realized that all they were doing basically is curtailing their market for their product, and now moving back more towards, maybe I'm right, maybe I'm left, but I'm certainly interested in making money. I sense that's going on in a lot of places now.
Well, I think a lot of brands have been given a lot to think about, that's for sure. I think all the data has shown over the last few years, I think because people right and left often feel like their voice doesn't count when they vote. In politics, they feel frustrated. So they can at least have their values reflected in the brands they buy from. And I think that's been true across the board. There are reasons why conservatives like Chick-fil-A, for example, liberals like Starbucks. But there are people that are conservative and liberal who patronize both, right? Mm-hmm. But there's a certain segment that feels much more strongly about it. So there are people that because of their values, they won't patronize Starbucks. So they go to a Black Rifle in terms of the coffee they drink. And then Black Rifle is deemed as being maybe not as conservative as we thought they were. And so their 1775 coffee comes in to reflect values for people to whom that's really important. And there's a lot of people that values are really important in terms of the products they consume.
But the vast majority are somewhere in the middle. If it's good, if Starbucks has something I like and I may not care for the way that company runs politically, if I like, I'll buy it. I think the vast majority really don't care, do they, Scott?
Well, they don't make the decision solely based on the values. If they think the coffee's not as good, they'll go where the better coffee is. But there's been a lot of research that has shown, there was a survey that came out that talked to thousands of people, asked them if two products are basically the same in your eyes in terms of quality, would values tip the scale? If you see them as being more conservative or more towards your leanings or the values you support. And over 70% of people said, well, if I see the product as basically a commodity, I'm going to go in the direction where I get to project or reflect my values.
A lot of these companies, it seemed to me, and I don't know, I don't have research, this is just anecdotal or observational anecdotal, but I think a lot of these companies that got involved politically in the last 5 years were doing so with pressure from employees, that the employee
Absolutely.
saw something he or she did not like, and they wanted to hold the company or the manager or the board responsible for the way the company projected itself. I don't sense that happening very much anymore, do you?
Well, I think a lot of that was a reaction to the Trump administration because there were people who were more liberal who were frustrated by that. They felt powerless in the face of it. And so, yes, I mean, keep in mind that most big companies are based in big cities, and most big cities tend to be more Democratic than Republican, and that's reflected in the workforces. And that pressure bubbled up. And since there's been a Democratic administration, maybe that pressure is dissipated. But not only that, Republicans have said, you know what you did, Bud Light, with Dylan Mulvaney, I didn't like it. And then Bud Light tanked. So there's been reaction on the other side. So no, you don't get to have your way, Disney. If I don't like what you're doing with your product, I'm going to say something about it. So it's certainly become a political football that, or a minefield for a lot of brands. You're right. They just want to make money, but it can be very tricky today how to do it without offending somebody.
So how much of an inroad are these quote-unquote anti-woke companies making? I mean, you mentioned the coffee that we hear a lot about, Black Rifle, and you mentioned the 1775 brand. Then there are other beers that have popped up, ultra-right beer, in I guess in retaliation of Bud Light. Are they really making that much of an inroad? And if so, how much of an inroad?
Well, the inroads are going to be made the most by the brands that are not a gimmick, but there's a really good quality. If ultimately, to your point earlier, if 1775 coffee is not of the same quality as other brands, people are ultimately going to buy the other brands. They might, might like the novelty of a 1775 coffee for a while, or an ultra-right beer. But the truth is about Bud Light, for example, is they were going down anyway. They just went down a lot faster. This whole Dylan Mulvaney thing was a reaction by Bud Light to try to get younger drinkers who were going away from their brand anyway. And now it's not ultra-right beer, it's Michelob Ultra, which, by the way, is also owned by Anheuser-Busch, like Bud Light. That's emerged as their top beer because it's appealed more to young people. So there's a niche of people. I mean, look, Daily Wire made $22 million last year, a tenth of all its revenues off of these products like woke-free shaving gear, leftist tears, dog bowls, things like that. That's not an insignificant amount of money, but it's still, in the grand scheme of things, kind of a niche. It's a fringe or a niche group that are making purchases just based on that.
Well, that whole Dylan Mulvaney thing, right? I mean, the woman that came up with that idea, she was a nitwit to begin with. I mean, she started castigating, frat boys and, sports gatherings. Well, that was their core business. And I think that InBev, for example, I think learned a very hard lesson. They're still ruling the roost. They did lose an inordinate amount of money on Bud Light, but they're doing just fine with other product. But I think it's probably something that companies need to start paying more attention to, which is messaging, and not just hiring somebody that might be the latest PR whiz that rolled down the street, but just have a concise message. Know your audience, know your consumer, know what they are buying, because the worst thing you want to hear anytime, anywhere is, I didn't come here for this. And that's, unfortunately, I think, is what's happened to some of these companies. The most notable is Bud Light. I just think sometimes companies that don't know where they're going or don't have a clear idea of what the messaging should be are the companies that fall into these political traps. Am I right or wrong? I've never worked in your business, but it seems that way.
Absolutely. And the best PR whizzes know that the answers aren't in their brain. It's in knowing the customers and what the customers want. And so what happened with the marketing person with the Bud Light brand was that she made a decision without doing proper research. Dylan Mulvaney is not radioactive. He was an activist and certainly met with Joe Biden, all these things. But Nike, the same month that Bud Light ran that disastrous promotion with Dylan Mulvaney, Nike promoted sports bras with Dylan Mulvaney. It did not hurt the Nike brand. You didn't hear anything about it because Nike's customer base is different. So this person was arrogant enough, and unfortunately a lot of CEOs and CMOs are arrogant in that way, arrogant enough to think they knew what was best as opposed to asking the customers what was best to them. In other words, a little research would have told them the vast majority of Bud Light customers are not going to like this. Maybe you should try something else.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and again, it doesn't take a lot to get there, but Scott Baradell is our guest. He's a branding expert. He is with Idea Grove. What is Idea Grove, by the way? I mentioned that, but I didn't really mention exactly what it is and what you do.
Yeah, we're a PR and digital marketing firm in Dallas, Texas, and we work with brands of all sizes, all types and sizes, to working through issues like this on the reputation management side, but also just a lot of help like at the outset you said, most brands are interested in acquiring customers and making more money. So that's the main thing we do. But everyone who's paying attention has to kind of wade into these issues of reputation and how you negotiate these kind of questions today.
He's also the author of the book Trust Signals: Brand Building in a Post-Truth World. Are we really in a post-truth world? And do you think you're ever going to go back to a simpler time when, you know what, politics really aren't going to enter into as many things as they are, particularly in your, your profession and what you do with companies? Are we really in a post-truth world, in your opinion?
It sure looks that way, and I'm with you. I wish that weren't the case. I love the days when you could read the newspaper and most people on all sides, they might disagree with what was on the editorial page, but they could at least agree that the facts being reported in the news was accurate. And now things are so fragmented. It just seems like systematically through how people acquire information through social media feeds and things like that, it's all like feeding them what they want to see. And so it's very hard for people not to get more and more different sets of quote unquote facts based on what seems to appeal to their emotions as opposed to what's objectively true. But if you go back historically, there was only a relatively brief window of time where we had this idea of objective truth in the news, because before that, in the 19th century, early 20th century, almost all the newspapers were funded by one of the political parties. And so all the news was reflecting their point of view then. So you could almost look at that period of, say, from the early 1900s to whenever we think this stopped, as almost a golden era of having this belief that most people had in objective news. I don't think most people believe that anymore, and I don't know if the genie can be put back in the bottle.
Yeah, I don't know either. I've often said people don't want information anymore; they want affirmation. And if if your beliefs go one way, you know exactly where to go, both in terms of cable news channels and now apparently products. Scott, it's always great catching up with you. Stay well. We'll do this again down the road. Thank you.
Thank you.